All right, hi folks. I'm Erin. Thanks for coming today. While we're waiting for a couple more people to filter in, I'm just going to throw up the PS4 trailer for my new game, just so you know who I am and what I'm about. I made this game called Gravity Ghost. It's a peaceful physics platformer set in outer space. It tells the story of a ghost girl who is looking for her friend, the ghost fox. And along the way, you find out about the girl's kind of journey when she was alive. And it's kind of a bittersweet story. I'm not sure you'll be able to hear the music, but cool. So that's Gravity Ghost. It's already out on Steam if you wanted to check it out for PC, Mac, or Linux. And then we're bringing it to PS4 this year, so that's pretty exciting. It's the culmination of a long journey in video games, which I'll sum up for you, hopefully right now. Cool.
Good. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for the nice pre-introduction. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Erin Swink. Currently, she's the creative director of the Games and Playable Media's master's program at University Southern California in Santa Cruz, but actually not in Santa Cruz itself, but at the extension campus they have here in Silicon Valley. So Erin actually has a bachelor's in science and also psychology, worked in research for a bit, but then on the side she was already making games and kind of discovering that's where her true passion lies. And so she left academia to some extent and now came back. But so in this intermediate 10 years or so, she created a number of independent educational games. Among those, what we just saw, her latest title, Gravity Ghost, which got critical reviews, raving reviews for the PC and will now come out soon for the PS4. She also has a consultant company called Ivy Games, and she has also received some acclaim. For example, the Fast Company named her among the most influential women in technology in 2011. So it's a pleasure to have her here, and her title of her talk is How to Use Video Games to Send a Message. So welcome, Erin.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Just show of hands, how many of you are students? Oh, not as many as I would thought. And the rest of you, do you work for Stanford? Work for the university? Cool, very cool. Anybody just hear about this and decide to come in and check it out? Oh, cool, great. So the subject of my talk is how to use video games to send a message, and I interpreted this pretty broadly, but I'm going to talk about my background in first educational games and then environmental activism, which is something I'm doing now. Eventually, I will come to tell you why I'm wearing a penguin hat on this screen cap from a Twitch stream, but that will come later. As Ingmar mentioned, I'm the creative director of the Games and Playable Media Master's program at UC Santa Cruz. And before that, I spent 10 years as an independent game developer. Just wanted to thank you all for having me here. I've never been to Stanford before, and I just know it by name and reputation, so this is all very exciting for me. My first game had pretty humble origins. I used Microsoft Paint to make the graphics. This was 2005. I was a freshman at university, and I was just, I think, procrastinating on exams. It's been so long I can't really remember, but I think that's what I was doing. I just started posting art to an internet forum saying, does anybody want to help me make this game? I had played a similar point-and-click adventure game that a fan, part of this fan community, had made, and I thought I could do that. So that's where I got my start. Shortly after, I made a game called Nanobots, which is about 6 little robots that need to work together to solve puzzles. They hate each other, is the twist there, so they need to overcome their differences to avoid being crushed by this guy, whose name is Dr. Killfun. I was in academia at the time, so maybe you can see the projection there. This is kind of a joke game I made in about a month with some friends of mine at a kind of a game-making getaway. The idea is it's like a remake, but worse than the original. We call it a demake, and it's a demake of American McGee's Alice, which was an Alice in Wonderland game. I kind of reimagined if it had been made as a piece of Soviet propaganda. These are all still available. You can get them from my website, livelyivy.com, if you're really interested. And then this is Puzzlebots. This was my first commercial game. Basically, another indie developer who had become a publisher had played Nanobots and wanted to offer me a bit more money to make a nicer version of it. And I kind of rewrote the whole thing, whole new story, whole new characters. And that came out in 2010. And that's on Steam, too, if you're interested. And finally, Gravity Ghost. That brings us to now, which we just saw. But there was kind of a quantum leap forward because Puzzlebots came out in 2010, and this came out in 2015, and what the heck was I doing with all that time in the middle? Well, the answer was I didn't have enough money to make a good game like this, so I needed to go and find a job. Oh, and just for a little bit of bragging rights, I guess, on the Steam page currently, we're still sitting at like 96% positive reviews. Maybe part of it's like not a lot of people have found it yet. Maybe the really mean people haven't discovered the game yet, so maybe I'm just thriving in obscurity here, but we'll see. But that kind of missing time in there, I worked on an educational game up at the University of Wisconsin. It was funded by a $2 million grant from the National Institute of Health, basically aiming to reduce implicit bias in academia. And the game we ended up making is called Fair Play. In it, you play as a grad student named Jamal who's trying to climb the academic ladder. And the target audience of this game was academic faculty who make hiring decisions, hoping, through this game we can make them aware of their own biases, implicit biases, ways they might be discriminating against people and not even realize it. So I come here to my first point in the talk. If you're going to be using video games to send a message, know your audience and know really who you're trying to reach. In this case, with the grant for Fair Play, the target audience was explicit. It was academic faculty making hiring decisions. And so I kind of became an academic anthropologist. I was working in a building that had a lot of ongoing sort of biology labs, and so I asked if I could just start sitting in on their meetings just to see, like, what is their culture like, and how is this different from what I expect? And so, I'd sit there with my notebook, kind of making quiet notes about what they were wearing and how they spoke to each other. One of the things that caught me off guard was that in this biology lab, if somebody was presenting something, anybody could interrupt them and kind of question what they were doing, and that wasn't counted as like rude, at least not in the culture that I was observing there. And so I'm like, okay, wow, people are pretty direct with each other. They like to call each other out on their errors, and that's not seen as, so just like a lot of stuff I had to absorb, including the setting and everything. And so our hypothesis with this design was like, you're playing as this young man who's trying to ascend the academic ladder. We're trying to paint this picture of like, he's just like you. He went through all the same steps you did, except he has these extra challenges he has to deal with. And so basically embedding it as much as we could in that academic culture was what we did. And so the setting of the game, this basically looks like the University of Wisconsin if you've been there. This is the outdoor sort of patio area right by the lake. The things you're able to talk about, the things you're doing in the game, these are all goals of an academic aspiring faculty member. So you're writing papers, you're getting grants, you're making connections, you're networking. The way that people talk, we had a team of content experts, which is quite intimidating because I was 24 and I was in a room full of people with PhDs all telling me, here's the way that things have to be. So that was a fun sort of exercise in learning how to navigate that power dynamic. Eventually, they had a lot of ideas for the game too. They were very excited to working on a video game. And they had ideas like, maybe when Jamal is sad, he gets smaller on the screen. And I'm like, okay, I don't think that's a good idea, but I don't want to insult you. So we ended up basically drawing this line that said, tell you what, we'll work on the game and put in the content, and then we'll show it to you, and you tell us if what we've made is accurate to the research and what needs to be taught in this game. And that worked out really well. So learning how to set those boundaries was as important as developing the game itself. But yes, working with content experts is a great experience. And so we put instances in the game, sort of in the environment, as well as the text of places where Jamal would experience sort of feeling like an other. And along the way, you encounter these sort of bias situations. And the point, of course, is to teach the player about these biases and what they're called. So you would learn about what these biases are, and then it would kind of softly quiz you on what they were. It's an educational game. It's not going to be the most fun thing. But they all had names, and hopefully that would let people recognize these things in real life when they encounter them. So I didn't actually, should have put this in my presentation, but I didn't. The research is very good that came out of this. The game was featured on the front page of the University of Wisconsin website in 2014, and I encourage you to go look up Fair Play and the very good research that's come out of that. But mainly, it seems like this game really does help people empathize. And my favorite story to come out of this was an email I got from somebody who worked on the team, and it was from somebody who had played the game, also brought their 11-year-old son, and this stood out to me. He said, the game made him realize that I could be hurting other people's feelings without knowing. Now that I realize that I can do better. And I actually started crying when I read that, because it was a year of my life working on this prototype. And it was actually the moment I've most felt proud of as a game designer. So I wanted to say that it's important to know your audience, to know the culture of the audience you're trying to reach, but also it might not be who you think. So that's sort of my advice on making educational games, is really know who you're making them for. An important caveat I wanted to talk about, which is if you begin making educational games, other people will become interested in hiring you. And I had a couple of opportunities roll my way that I passed on. And one of them came from something that sounded actually pretty benevolent. The pitch was a game to help women learn to run a business. It was going to be a phone game, accessible, to make it accessible to people who don't have a desktop PC at home. So, people who might not, I ended up learning a bit more about what they wanted. So the way it was pitched to me was there was this copper mine that had set up in a developing country, and the town had all these problems where the men were working. There was a lot of alcohol abuse, a lot of domestic violence, and there's a woman pitching me on this idea. I'm like, okay. She's like, so we want to make a game to reach out to their wives to kind of, help them. And I was like, the strong implication of that to me was that to kind of keep them quiet or keep them placated. And the whole thing just felt very off to me. And I just couldn't believe that here's a way video games are being used to kind of reinforce the old power dynamics in the world. And I just I'm not sure what ended up happening with that project, but I wanted to make the caveat that if you can't make something that makes the world a better place, just try not to make it worse. That's golden rule, I guess. Yeah, that was startling. Still kind of gets to me, because it was coming from somebody who I trusted. She's like, I got this opportunity for you. It's from this mine. I'm like, what? Okay. This is my second point, which is when you're using games to send a message, know your cultural norms, know what it is, how people expect things to work, and because these norms can be changed, they can be challenged, but it's important to know the space of something before you start trying to push on it. A pretty good example of this is the types of playable characters in the game Overwatch that came out literally yesterday. Who's interested in Overwatch? That section there. Excellent. I'm looking forward to it as well, as soon as they figure out the server problems. So yeah, not only does this game have a lot of diversity in terms of the characters, it's just a lot of different characters. I love that there's not just gender and racial diversity, there's also species diversity and robots and things. And I love that just it's everybody gets to play and it's all equalized. They balance the characters against each other and make it so no one is more powerful than the others, and it's all about skill. This is a big departure from the way games looked just a couple of years ago. And there's kind of been a sea change happening in terms of representation in video games, which I will not get into here. But it seems like the change has arrived, and I don't think there's any going back. So this is a cultural norm. The norm used to be, you were Shooty McDude face shooting things, and now it's everybody gets to play. And I like that a lot. Don't tweet me on that. And I absolutely believe that representation in games is important. But my personal issue that I care about a lot is the environment and preserving it and trying to make sure we make smart decisions about the way we use our resources now. I gave a talk last September called How to Get Game Developers to Save the Planet. This was at the Gaming Insiders Summit in San Francisco. And it came about because I started to read up about climate change, and it scared the shit out of me, and I just felt the need to do something, and I thought, I'm going to read as much as I can, learn as much as I can, and then start talking to people about that. And I didn't expect this. The crowd was not very big, but it got written up in VentureBeat. That's Dean Takahashi. He's a pretty big deal. So I felt pretty happy that the message got far and wide. I do want to talk to you guys about climate change, but I actually kind of don't because it depresses me. You can search for the things that are hopeful, but in the end, the picture is that we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. And mainly when I start reading about it, I just end up in this place where I can't think about what to do. It's like this, it's the size of civilization, and so how is any one of us meant to grapple with that? I'm still searching for that answer. But if you want to read up on the subject, I highly recommend this book, This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. She really puts it all out there, and I basically didn't sleep for like 2 days after I read this. So it's important, and I'm not going to get into the super details here, but the gist of it is that we're pumping a bunch of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and some methane too. That they call those greenhouse gases because when sunlight comes into the atmosphere, it bounces around. The greenhouse gases trap it. The planet warms up. And there's significant evidence that if we pass about 2 degrees Celsius of warming over pre-industrial times, that things will start to melt in the Arctic, like permafrost could melt and methane could escape that causes more warming that we're no longer in control over, and it can basically spiral out of control. And that scares the shit out of me, and I really just don't want that to happen. And so I kind of that's where I tuned back in. I'm like, well, we can't let that happen, right? Here in the article, I kind of recap my come to Jesus moment, but it's like, This Changes Everything is a very good book, and there's a passage in there where Naomi Klein says something like, the environmental movement became somehow about individual actions, like we're supposed to drive less and we're supposed to not use plastic things. And it's like, why are we expected to make these sacrifices if the people who pollute, like power plants, are allowed to do that as much as they want? That's unfair, and we feel that it's unfair, and I think a lot of people check out, and a lot of people know bullshit when they hear it. So basically what we need is plummeting fossil fuel emissions and a switch to renewable energy as fast as humanly possible, probably faster than we've made any technological leap before. And I believe that if we know this to be true, then we have a moral imperative to act on it. That is what I believe in my heart. This is a quote from Pope Francis, accepting the urgency. It seems clear to me that climate change is the problem, which can no longer be left to a future generation. And I read this stuff as somebody who is a scientist who knows how to read a graph and knows about consequences. So one thing that I've learned in all my research on this is that the barriers to clean energy are mostly political and not technological. We have solar, we have wind, we need to make some improvements in battery life, energy transport and storage, but on the whole, it's just inertia and vested interests. The good news is the world is transitioning to green energy, but we need to just move faster, and we need a new cultural norm, and that's the thing I want to push on, right? That's the thing I'm thinking about. How can I push on that? I've been very encouraged by things like the Divest movement. The Divest Reinvest is what it's sometimes called. Basically, it started from students all over the world. They started to say to their universities, your pension funds, everything is invested in things like coal and oil, and that's not fair because you're supposed to be preparing us for our future, and how can you say that if you're helping to make the worst future happen? So divestment started with schools, and it's just such a simple idea that it got pushed all over the world in just a matter of months. It started in earnest in about 2013, and now you'll see keep it in the ground, right? That's saying the fossil fuel, the coal and the oil, just leave it in the ground. Don't burn it where it can't, leave it there where it can't hurt us. And even Stanford has divested from coal as a result of that, which I was pretty heartened to hear. So it's catching on, and the idea with divestment was to change the cultural norm. It wasn't to bankrupt the fossil fuel companies. It was to phrase this in terms of the moral issue. You know, it's almost like the pressure that got put on tobacco companies in the 80s and 90s saying, you're killing people. You know, you need to be subject to the same rules as the rest of us. And that's when some of the tobacco lawsuits started to happen. It was when public opinion turned against those companies. And so, yeah, it's basically to bring them down to a level where we can say, look, you were partly responsible for this. You need to stand up and face that. And so you'll start to see there are lawsuits pending against Exxon, and it's all very interesting. But divestment is one example of a changing cultural norm that says the status quo is no longer okay. You can't continue to make money on something that's killing the future. It's not right. So a lot has happened actually since I gave that talk in September. For one, the Paris Climate Agreement was passed, and that says basically codifying like, yes, we really want to keep it below 2 degrees Celsius of warming. We are at about 1 degree Celsius now, so it's going to be a rough ride if we're going to make it. Reaching the Paris goals requires rapid decarbonization of the entire global economy. Some people think by 2050, and that's 34 years from now. And that seems really soon to me. But I also think about, 34 years ago, that was, the early 1980s. They didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the personal computer. Clean energy was a thing of the future. We didn't even have cell phones. Like, all these things have happened in that amount of time. And I'm encouraged by what could continue to happen in the future. But like I said, we need to give it a push. We need to push clean energy and vote and tell people, like, this needs to happen now. So this is, what runs around in my head all the time. It's like, no pressure, but this is what we have to do. All of us, our generation. I don't like to get bogged down. I like to ask, what can I do? I was getting very angry that others hadn't done enough. How could the older generation not have stopped this? But then I realized I'm 29 and I haven't done anything either. And I'm an adult. I can't blame it on the adults. This is time for me to act. And despite the things that are at stake, I really, really like this quote by Barack Obama from September. There are some amazing, beautiful things in this world that aren't coming back. That should give us all pause. But I don't wallow in sadness because we've got too much work to do. The world is always changing, and there are going to be changes in our lifetime that I wish hadn't happened. There are also changes that have eradicated polio and changes that have reduced infant mortality, and those we celebrate. He says, so there are some things I've experienced and I've seen that I suspect my grandchildren won't, and that's a sad thing. But the world is full of wonders, and I figure that we still have time to save most of them, and our kids will probably discover some new ones. So I find myself returning to this quote quite a lot because it's easy to get tripped up in the sadness of things and to think about what we could lose, but also I think he's right. There's too much work to do. You can't wallow in it. And so here I reach my third point about using video games to send a message, and now I'm not talking about developing individual games anymore. I'm talking about using games to reach an audience. So I like to think about systems. I gave a talk in Australia a couple years ago about how I managed to pay $200 cash for a CAT scan that I needed because I didn't have good insurance at the time, just like by thinking about who benefits from the system and how can I just get what I want without having to go through insurance, which is a nightmare, pre-Obamacare. So I like to think about systems. And I like to think about, I put the question to you, where do you have influence? And who do you know? And who can you talk to? And I think you will probably discover that you have more power than you think. So I thought to myself, who do I know? I know a lot of game developers. I've been in the industry for more than 10 years. Hey, games are very popular. I bet we can reach a lot of people. So I created something called Beat the Dev last November. And it's a Twitch stream, and if you don't know Twitch, it's basically like a video streaming service. You can broadcast yourself live onto the internet, and it doesn't cost anything. And what we did was basically set up a telethon where people can donate certain amounts, and then we celebrate those donations and try to raise more money. And it all went to benefit the Sierra Club, which is an organization that I really love, and I kept finding their name over and over when I was doing my research. The Sierra Club has shut down half of America's coal plants since 2009. There was this whole thing happening that we didn't even see because we weren't looking for it. But this is, coal is on its way out. Divestment ends up being a good business decision too, because the red coal plants are the only ones that are active and upcoming. The green ones are all the ones that have been canceled. So that's very clearly to me the past. So this is the amount of coal plants that they've managed to retire, which I don't know. I found myself when I was really, really upset about this stuff, I would just open up this page and look at it. It's like a progress bar in a game. It's like there's so much work we've already done. We just need to push it a little bit more. So I know a lot of game developers, and so I just started emailing people. I'm like, hey, do you want to be on this stream? It's called Beat the Dev, and the idea was a game streamer person would be playing against a game developer at their own game and trying to beat them, hence Beat the Dev. So I managed to put together the schedule in about a month. I still don't know how I did it, but so I called up, not everybody who was a developer was somebody I knew. Sometimes it was friends of friends. They're saying, hey, Erin's doing this thing. This sounds like kind of cool. Like, let's get involved. So this is, you see 24 different games, and that's at least 48 people, right? Because it's a streamer and a developer. Some pretty big titles in there. I was quite proud of this. But here's what it looks like when it's broadcasting. So this is a guy named Ryan Weimeyer. It's a friend of mine from when I lived in Chicago. Made a game called Organ Trail, which is like Oregon Trail, but organs, because it's about the zombie apocalypse. It's a very good game. I think it's on mobile if you're interested. And he's playing against my friend Keisha, who runs a group called Sugar Gamers in Chicago, which is like an all-women gaming guild. And that was a really fun one, because Ryan got into the spirit of it, and he would switch his hats when I wasn't looking. And you may notice I'm wearing a silly hat too, and that's because every time we reached a funding goal, I would put on a sillier hat, to try to incentivize people to give more money. So I tried to put gameplay reward stuff into the stream as well. And every time we reached a funding goal, I'd pull up this silly overlay that says nature, and we'd play an eagle sound on the phone, from an app, very majestic. So I was very proud of how this came together. We did it over the course of a weekend. We raised more than $5,000, and we didn't really advertise it because nobody wants to write about a stream. The gaming blogs want to write about games. This all was just very word of mouth and grassroots, and people just spread the word from their own Twitter accounts and their own Twitch pages. A lot of the streamers who are on, they can host you, and then they're streaming to their followers too. And so here's the thing that I care the most about is now 17,000 people got the message. Right? I'm not trying to reach kids. Unfortunately, the urgency of what's ahead of us means that by the time they get to be adults, it'll be too late. It will be decided what happens. And so I'm trying to reach young adults, like the students in this room, like the people watching the stream. I'm trying to establish a new social norm that video game developers support clean energy and the rapid shift away from fossil fuels. We have a powerful reach. We can enact a lot of positive change in the world. And I believe that because we make games that reach primarily young people, that we have an obligation to them. So I'm trying to establish this new social norm in the language that we speak now. Here's the hashtag on Beat the Dev. Lots of the developers talking about it, fans talking about it. We got an article in a thing called Gamers with Hearts. Lots of people so happy we meet at 5K, and that ended up just kind of being an arbitrary number that we got close to by the end of the weekend. It wasn't our goal or anything. I had no idea how much money it was going to make. We got a write-up in Engadget, talking about the stream. Lots of really nice people wrote about it and spread the word, and it was just something I invented a month prior to when we launched. So this is me using video games to send a message. You get what I'm saying with the talk here? I think that creating educational games is very good, but I think there's actually a bigger picture here, which is the culture at large. So this is my thesis here. Primarily, I see these three things as being the most important, which is to know your audience, who you're trying to reach. It might not be who you think, but as much as you can, tailor your message to those people. Know your cultural norms, because they can be changed. With the environmental stuff, I don't think there was a lot of history of games and environmentalism. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know there have been some eco games, but they've never been super popular. So I'm like, well, why not make a new norm? Why not? We're futuristic. Why not us being that vanguard? And then think about systems and think about where you have influence. And I'm not saying you have to work on climate change. You can work on your own issues too, right? There's so many things out there. So much is brought to our attention constantly. So many bad things are constantly being projected to us. And I think that the key to staying sane and all that is to pick your battle and figure out what it is that you actually really care about and figure out who you have influence with and to try to make that happen. So the next Beat the Dev is coming up next weekend. It's June 3rd, 4th, and 5th got some cool things coming up. We've got now a couple of more AAA games, because it's like an established thing now. We've got the new Ratchet & Clank on there. We've got Walking Dead Episode 1, and we've got XCOM 2, and some other cool stuff I can't tell you about yet. So this is my way of trying to exert some control and feel at peace with how scared I am about the future. So this is my thing. Thank you for listening to me here. You guys are a very influential group. I hope that you've enjoyed my message. So send a message. This is mine. Thank you.